I'm sitting in my car outside, groundwork coffee, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor me to something solid. The December air seeps through the gaps around the windows, turning my breath visible in small puffs that fog the glass. My phone sits face up on the passenger seat, screen dark now, but I can still see the last message burned into my retinas. Wesley's words, casual as always, but carrying a weight I'm not sure I want to decode. Where are you? Thought we were hanging tonight. Chill, remember? Just us. Just us. Those two words shouldn't make my chest tighten the way they do, but here I am, 29 years old, and still parsing text messages like a teenager, trying to understand if someone likes them back. The rational part of my mind knows I should be inside already, shaking hands with David from the dating app, apologizing for being 10 minutes late, ordering something warm to chase away this cold that seems to have settled in my bones. But instead I'm here, staring through the condensation on my windshield at the warm glow spilling from the coffee shop windows, watching strangers move through their Friday evening rituals while I sit frozen in this moment of indecision. David is probably checking his watch by now. He seemed nice enough through our messages. Software engineer like me, shared my taste in obscure documentaries, had an easy laugh during our brief phone call earlier this week. Normal. Safe. The kind of person who wouldn't make me question every interaction, every casual touch, every offhand comment about keeping things simple between us. The kind of person who wouldn't send me mixed signals wrapped in that lazy smile I've been trying not to think about for the better part of a decade. But Wesley isn't David, and that's exactly the problem. My phone buzzes against the leather seat, and I know without looking that it's him again. It always is. For the past 3 hours, ever since our lunch conversation went sideways in a way I'm still trying to understand, Wesley has been texting with the persistence of someone who has never learned to sit with discomfort. I pick up the phone with careful fingers, as if it might burn me. Come on, see. Don't leave me hanging. Movie night, remember? I already got the beer. Movie night. Like we're still college sophomores sprawled across his dorm room floor, sharing bags of stale popcorn and complaining about our professors. Like the past few months haven't changed the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not paying attention. Like the way his hand lingers on my shoulder when he leans over to see what I'm working on at my laptop doesn't make my skin feel electric in a way that terrifies me. I close my eyes and let my head fall back against the headrest, trying to center myself in the kind of logical thinking that usually guides me through complicated problems. This should be simple. I have a date scheduled with someone who asked me out without any ambiguity, someone who won't disappear behind vague phrases about keeping things chill when the conversation gets too real. Wesley made his position clear a week ago when I tried to bring up the shift I'd been feeling between us, the way our friendship had started to feel charged with something neither of us was willing to name. I don't want to complicate things between us, I had said, the words careful and measured, testing the waters of a conversation I wasn't sure I was ready to have. Wesley had laughed then, that easy sound that always made me feel like I was overthinking everything. He'd shrugged in that casual way of his, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, and looked at me with those green eyes that never seemed to take anything too seriously. Let's keep it chill, he'd said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Let's keep it chill. The phrase has been echoing in my head ever since, bouncing around like a mantra I can't quite believe in. Because if Wesley really wanted to keep things chill, if he really saw me as nothing more than his oldest friend, then why did his entire demeanor change today when I mentioned David over lunch? Why did his jaw tighten when I said the word date, like I'd admitted to some kind of betrayal? Why did his hands clench against the tabletop, knuckles going white as he stared down at his sandwich like it had personally offended him? Oh, he'd said after a long moment of silence, his voice dropping into a register I'd never heard from him before. Guess that's what you're into now. The words had hit me like a physical thing, sharp and unexpected. There was something in his tone that sounded almost wounded, but when I looked up to meet his eyes, he was already retreating behind that familiar mask of casual indifference. He'd taken another bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, and changed the subject to something safe about work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some invisible line I hadn't even known existed. Through the coffee shop window, I can see David at a corner table, checking his phone with the patient resignation of someone who has been stood up before. He's wearing a navy sweater that brings out his eyes, and his hair is styled in that effortless way that probably took 20 minutes to achieve. He looks like the kind of person who would never leave me guessing about his intentions, who would never hide behind phrases like keeping it chill when what he really meant was something else entirely. I should go inside. I should apologize for being late, order a drink, and spend the evening getting to know someone who might actually be available for the kind of relationship I've been telling myself I want. Someone who won't make me analyze every text message for hidden meaning, who won't send mixed signals wrapped in decade-old friendship, who won't make me feel like I'm slowly losing my mind, trying to decode behavior that might not mean anything at all. But my hands remain locked around the steering wheel, and my phone sits between us like a barrier I can't quite bring myself to cross. The thing about Wesley is that he's never been chill about anything else in his life. He's passionate and impulsive, the kind of person who decides to drive 6 hours to see a band on a Tuesday night, who quits jobs when his boss annoys him, who once stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me debug code, because he could see I was frustrated even though he doesn't understand the first thing about programming. He throws himself into everything with the kind of intensity that makes other people feel more alive just by being around him. So when he tells me to keep it chill, when he shrugs off the tension that's been building between us like it's nothing more than my imagination, it feels like a betrayal of everything I know about who he is. It feels like he's asking me to pretend that the past few months haven't happened, that I haven't noticed the way he's been around more, texting later at night, finding excuses to touch my arm or my back in ways that feel too deliberate to be accidental. My breath fogs the windshield again, and I use my sleeve to wipe away a small circle so I can see David more clearly. He's pulled out a book now, resigned to the possibility that his date might not show up. The sight of him, patient and kind and completely unaware of the internal war happening 30 feet away in a cold car, makes something twist in my stomach. He deserves better than this. He deserves someone who isn't sitting outside questioning whether they should choose safety over the terrifying possibility of something real. But as I reach for the door handle, my phone buzzes one more time, and Wesley's name lights up the screen with an urgency that makes my pulse quicken despite everything. Simon, please, I need to see you tonight. And there it is. The crack in his casual facade. The admission that maybe keeping it chill isn't as easy for him as he wants me to believe. For words that contain more honesty than our entire conversation last week, more vulnerability than Wesley usually shows to anyone, including me. I look back at David, still reading his book, still waiting for someone who might never walk through that door. Then I look at my phone, at Wesley's message glowing in the darkness of my car like a question I'm not sure I'm ready to answer. The engine starts with a quiet rumble, and my hands move the gear shift into reverse without consulting my brain. As I pull away from the curb, I catch one last glimpse of David through the window, and I hope someday I'll be brave enough to deserve someone like him. But tonight, I'm driving toward the unknown territory of whatever Wesley needs to tell me, toward the conversation we should have had a week ago when he first told me to keep it chill. Tonight, I'm choosing the beautiful, terrifying uncertainty of someone who has never learned how to be casual about anything that matters. The drive to Wesley's apartment takes 12 minutes through the quiet Friday evening streets, but it feels like crossing into another country entirely. I know this route by heart. Past the Vietnamese restaurant where we discovered pho during a particularly brutal winter 5 years ago, past the bookstore where Wesley once spent an hour reading me passages from a travel guide about Iceland, because he was convinced we should take a trip there someday, past the corner where his transmission died last spring, and I sat with him on the curb waiting for the tow truck, sharing a bag of gas station chips and listening to him worry about money in that rare, unguarded way he only shows me. 10 years of friendship mapped out in familiar landmarks, each one carrying the weight of shared history that makes this moment feel both inevitable and impossible. Wesley Hart has been the constant in my adult life, the person who knew me before I figured out who I was supposed to be, before I learned to build routines and systems to keep myself safe from the kind of uncertainty that used to overwhelm me. We met during sophomore year when I was drowning in advanced calculus, and he was the bartender at the campus dive bar who somehow convinced me that what I needed wasn't another study session, but a night of terrible karaoke and cheaper beer. He was everything I wasn't, loud where I was quiet, impulsive where I was careful, magnetic in a way that drew people into his orbit without any effort at all. He made friends the way other people breathed, naturally and without thinking about it. while I was still learning how to make eye contact with strangers. But somehow, inexplicably, he chose me. Not as his project or his charity case, but as his person, the one he called when his father had another heart attack, the one he trusted with his worst fears about never amounting to anything, the one whose couch he crashed on when his relationship with Marcus imploded in spectacular fashion 3 years ago. We built our friendship on a foundation of simplicity, no drama, no complications, no expectations beyond showing up for each other when it mattered. That promise of simplicity is what made it safe for me to fall for him gradually, quietly, in ways I could pretend weren't happening. Because Wesley was Wesley, charming and affectionate with everyone, quick to throw an arm around shoulders, or ruffle hair, or pull people into hugs that lasted just a beat too long. His casual intimacy never meant anything specific, so I could file away the moments when his touch lingered on my skin and tell myself I was reading too much into perfectly normal behavior. I learned to love him in the spaces between words, in the way he remembered that I hate crowded restaurants and always suggested the booth in the back corner, in the way he texted me photos of dogs he saw on the street because he knew they made me smile, in the way he defended my work ethic to friends who didn't understand why I spent weekends debugging code instead of going out. I learned to want him during late-night conversations when the rest of the world felt far away and it was just us, talking about everything and nothing in voices gone soft with exhaustion and honesty. But wanting Wesley felt like reaching for something that would always remain just out of grasp, so I taught myself to be satisfied with friendship. I dated other people, good people who deserved better than someone who was always comparing them to the impossible standard of how Wesley made me feel. I built a life that looked complete from the outside, steady job, nice apartment, hobbies that fulfilled me, friends who genuinely cared about my well-being. I convinced myself that unrequited love was just another fact of life, like being allergic to shellfish or preferring winter to summer. And then something shifted. It started small, so gradually that I almost missed it. Wesley began texting more frequently, not just funny memes or plans to hang out, but good morning messages and random thoughts throughout his day. He started showing up at my apartment without calling first, letting himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago, and making himself at home on my couch like he belonged there. His touches became more frequent, more intentional, a hand on my lower back when he passed behind me in the kitchen, fingers brushing mine when he handed me a drink, the way he'd sprawl across my couch during movies with his legs tangled with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. The change was subtle enough that I could have convinced myself I was imagining it, except for the way other people started noticing. My coworker Emma raised an eyebrow when Wesley picked me up from the office Christmas party, noting how he waited by the door with a patience that seemed less like friendship and more like something else entirely. My sister asked pointed questions about him during our monthly phone calls, wondering aloud why I never brought anyone else around anymore when Wesley was clearly such a fixture in my life. But every time I thought about addressing it directly, every time I considered asking Wesley what these changes meant, he would do something to remind me of our unspoken agreement to keep things simple. He would mention a woman he'd met at the bar, or make a joke about my terrible dating life, or casually drop the word friend into conversation in a way that felt like a gentle reminder of the boundaries we'd established a decade ago. So I said nothing, caught between the terrifying possibility that I might be right about what I was seeing and the even more terrifying possibility that I might be wrong. I learned to exist in the space between hope and certainty, telling myself that having Wesley in my life as a friend was better than risking everything for something that might not even be real. Now, pulling into the parking lot of his building, I realized that all of that careful emotional management was just preparation for this moment. The moment when Wesley's carefully maintained casual facade finally cracked enough to let the truth show through. His apartment windows are lit against the December darkness, and I can see his silhouette moving restlessly from room to room like he's been pacing since he sent that last message. I turn off the engine and sit in the sudden silence, knowing that whatever happens in the next few hours will either validate 10 years of careful friendship or transform it into something else entirely. There's no going back to the safety of uncertainty once we have this conversation, no way to unknow whatever Wesley needs to tell me tonight. But as I walk toward his building, keys heavy in my pocket, I find myself choosing courage over comfort for maybe the first time in my adult life. Wesley opens his door before I finish knocking, like he's been waiting right behind it, listening for my footsteps in the hallway. His hair is disheveled in a way that suggests he's been running his hands through it. And there's something in his expression I can't quite read, relief mixed with something that looks almost like panic. He's wearing the faded blue Henley I bought him last Christmas, the one he claimed was too nice for everyday wear, but somehow ended up in his regular rotation anyway. "Come in," he says, stepping back to let me pass, but his voice carries none of its usual easy confidence. There's a tension in the way he moves, a restless energy that reminds me of how he gets before job interviews or difficult conversations with his family. The apartment smells like the vanilla candle his sister gave him, the one he only lights when he's anxious about something he can't name. I settle onto his couch, the same spot I've occupied countless times before, but tonight it feels different somehow. The familiarity of his living space, the stack of books he never finishes, the guitar he plays when he thinks no one is listening, the framed photo of us from last summer's camping trip. All of it seems charged with new meaning, like I'm seeing it through different eyes. Wesley doesn't sit. Instead, he paces to the kitchen, opens the refrigerator, closes it again without taking anything out. His movements are sharp and purposeful in a way that doesn't match the casual evening he'd suggested in his texts. When he finally turns to face me, there's something in his expression that makes my chest tighten with anticipation. "So," he says, crossing his arms over his chest in a gesture that looks more defensive than relaxed. "How was your date?" The question hangs in the air between us, loaded with implications I'm not sure either of us is ready to unpack. I could lie, tell him it went well, pretend that I spent the evening getting to know David over coffee and conversation instead of sitting in my car wrestling with the weight of a decade's worth of unspoken feelings. But something about the way Wesley is looking at me, the carefully controlled expression that doesn't quite hide the vulnerability underneath, makes me choose honesty instead. I didn't go, I tell him, watching his face for a reaction. For a moment, his carefully maintained composure slips, and I catch a glimpse of something that looks like relief flickering across his features before he schools his expression back into neutrality. He runs a hand through his hair, a gesture I've seen him make thousands of times, but which now seems deliberate, like he's buying himself time to figure out what to say next. "Why?" he asks, and there's something in his tone that suggests the answer matters more than he wants to admit. "Because you asked me to come here instead," I say simply. "Because when you texted that you needed to see me, it felt more important than coffee with a stranger." Wesley nods slowly, like he's processing information that confirms something he'd hoped might be true. He finally moves away from the kitchen, but instead of sitting beside me on the couch, he chooses the chair across from it, maintaining a distance that feels both protective and punishing. "He's probably nice," Wesley says after a long moment, his voice careful and measured. "David, sounds like a good guy. Stable job, shared interests, all that stuff you're supposed to look for." There's something bitter in the way he says it, like he's reciting a list of qualities he knows he doesn't possess. I want to tell him that nice and stable aren't the things that make my pulse quicken, that shared interests matter less than the way someone makes you feel like the best version of yourself, but I sense that's not what he needs to hear right now. He is nice, I agree. Or he seemed to be, from what I could tell. But nice isn't everything. Wesley looks up at me then, and for a moment his mask slips completely. "What is everything?" he asks, and there's something raw in his voice that makes me feel like we're finally approaching the conversation we should have had months ago. I consider my words carefully, knowing that what I say next will either move us closer to honesty or send us retreating back to the safety of casual friendship. The weight of 10 years of history presses down on me. All those moments when I chose silence over risk, comfort over truth. "I don't know," I tell him finally, "but I know it's not something you can force or fake or pretend into existence. It's either there or it isn't." Wesley is quiet for a long time, staring at his hands like they might contain the answers to questions he's afraid to ask out loud. When he finally speaks, his voice is so soft I have to lean forward to hear him. "What if it's there, but you're too scared to do anything about it?" he asks. "What if you've convinced yourself that keeping things simple is better than risking everything for something that might not work out?" The question hits me like a physical thing, sharp and unexpected. Because it's the same question I've been asking myself for months. The The same fear that's kept me silent through all those late-night conversations and casual touches and moments when the space between us felt charged with possibility. Then you're probably missing out on something beautiful, I say, the words coming out before I can stop them. But you're also protecting yourself from something potentially devastating. Wesley laughs, but there's no humor in it. Exactly, he says. So what do you do with that? How do you choose between safety and the chance that everything could change for the better? I look at him then, really look at him, taking in the way his shoulders are tense with unexpressed emotion, the way his fingers tap anxiously against his thigh, the way his eyes keep darting to mine and then away again like he's afraid of what he might see there. And I realize that we're not talking in hypotheticals anymore, that this conversation is about us, about the thing we've been dancing around for months without ever naming it directly. I guess, I say slowly, you have to decide what scares you more, the possibility of losing what you have, or the possibility of never knowing what you could have had. Wesley nods, like I've confirmed something he already knew but needed to hear from someone else. He's quiet for another long moment, and I can practically see him working through the implications of what we've just said to each other, the way we've finally acknowledged that there's something here worth being afraid of. When he looks up at me again, there's a determination in his expression that I recognize from the moments when he's made up his mind about something important. Simon, he says, and my name sounds different in his voice, heavier somehow. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. The question hangs in the air between us, unasked but already reshaping the atmosphere of the room. Wesley's hands are trembling slightly as he leans forward in his chair, and I find myself holding my breath, waiting for him to cross whatever line he's been approaching all evening. The vanilla candle flickers on the coffee table, casting shifting shadows across his face, and for a moment I think he might lose his nerve, might retreat back into the safety of casual conversation and pretend this moment never happened. But then he takes a deep breath, squares his shoulders, and looks directly into my eyes with an intensity that makes my heart race in ways I haven't allowed myself to acknowledge in years. Do you ever think about us? He asks, and his voice is so quiet I almost miss it. Not as friends, I mean. As something else. The words hit me like a physical force, stealing whatever response I might have prepared. Because this is it, the moment I've been both hoping for and dreading for longer than I care to admit. The question that changes everything, that makes it impossible to pretend we're still operating within the safe boundaries of friendship we established a decade ago. I could deflect. I could make a joke about how much beer he's had tonight, or ask him what brought this on, or find some way to turn the conversation back to safer ground. But there's something in his expression that stops me, a vulnerability so raw and honest that meeting it with anything less than complete truth would feel like a betrayal of everything we've built together. Yes, I tell him, the word coming out steady despite the way my pulse is hammering against my ribs. More than I should. More than is probably healthy for either of us. Wesley exhales like he's been holding his breath for months, his shoulders sagging with what looks like relief mixed with terror. He runs both hands through his hair this time, a gesture so familiar it makes my chest ache with the weight of how long I've been loving him without saying it. Thank God, he says, and then immediately looks embarrassed by his own response. I mean, not thank God like I'm happy you've been suffering or anything, but thank God I'm not completely losing my mind. The admission breaks something open between us, some carefully maintained wall that's been keeping us on opposite sides of honesty. I find myself leaning forward, drawn by the magnetic pull of finally being able to have this conversation, of finally being able to acknowledge what we've both been feeling, but neither of us has been brave enough to name. How long? I ask, because suddenly I need to know, need to understand how much of what I thought was one-sided longing might have been mutual all along. Wesley looks down at his hands, a flush creeping up his neck in a way that makes him look younger, more uncertain than I've seen him in years. Since Marcus, he says quietly, since that whole thing imploded and I was sleeping on your couch, feeling sorry for myself and trying to figure out what I actually wanted from my life. The timeline hits me like a revelation. That was 3 years ago, 3 years of careful distance and casual touches and late-night conversations that I convinced myself didn't mean anything beyond friendship. 3 years of Wesley knowing how he felt and choosing to keep it hidden, choosing to maintain the fiction that we were just friends even as the tension between us grew thick enough to cut. But you never said anything, I point out, And there's no accusation in my voice, just confusion. You had plenty of opportunities. That night when we talked until 4 in the morning about what we wanted our lives to look like. That weekend we drove to the coast, and you fell asleep against my shoulder in the car. Last month when we... I know, Wesley interrupts, his voice sharp with frustration that seems directed entirely at himself. I know I had chances, but every time I thought about saying something, I'd remember how good we are as friends, how easy it is between us, and I'd get terrified that I'd ruin it, that I'd make things weird and lose you completely. The irony isn't lost on me, that we've both been protecting the same thing, both so afraid of losing what we have that we've been willing to live with wanting something more. The realization makes me feel simultaneously heartbroken and hopeful, like we've been parallel lines running beside each other for years without realizing we were heading toward the same destination. And then today happened. Wesley continues, his voice gaining strength as he works through his thoughts out loud. You mentioned David so casually, like it was nothing, like going on dates with other people was just a normal part of your life that I wasn't supposed to have opinions about. And I completely lost it. I remember the way his face had changed at lunch, the sudden tension in his jaw when I'd mentioned meeting someone from the dating app. At the time, I'd attributed it to surprise, maybe some protective instinct born from years of friendship. I hadn't allowed myself to consider that it might be jealousy, that Wesley might have felt territorial about something he'd never claimed the right to protect. Lost it how? I ask, because I need to understand the full scope of what today's conversation meant to him. How much of his reaction was fear, and how much was something else entirely? Wesley looks up at me then, and there's something fierce in his expression, something possessive that makes my breath catch in my throat. I wanted to ask you not to go, he says. I wanted to tell you that the thought of you with someone else made me feel sick, that I'd been lying to myself for 3 years about being okay with just friendship. I wanted to be honest about the fact that every time you mention dating someone, I have to fight the urge to find reasons why they're not good enough for you. The confession hangs between us, raw and dangerous and more honest than anything Wesley has ever said to me. I can see how much it cost him to admit it, the way his hands are clenched in his lap, the way his breathing has gone shallow with anxiety about how I might respond. So why didn't you? I asked gently. Why did you tell me to keep it chill instead of telling me the truth? Wesley's laugh is bitter, self-deprecating in a way that makes me want to close the distance between us and offer some kind of comfort. Because I'm a coward, he says simply. Because telling you to keep it chill felt safer than admitting that I haven't felt chill about you in years. Because I convinced myself that having you as a friend who might sometimes date other people was better than risking everything for something that might not work out the way I hoped. But seeing you get ready to move on, to actually build something real with someone else, Wesley continues, his voice growing stronger with each word, made me realize that keeping it chill isn't actually keeping anything. It's just another way of losing you. Just slower and more painful than the honest conversation I've been too scared to have. And suddenly I understand that we've reached the moment where everything changes, where 3 years of careful pretending finally collides with the truth we've both been carrying. The space between us feels electric with possibility and terror in equal measure, and I know that whatever I say next will determine whether we step forward into something new or retreat back into the safety of what we've always been. The silence that follows Wesley's confession stretches between us like a bridge I'm not sure either of us is ready to cross. I can see him watching my face, searching for some sign of how I'm processing what he's just revealed, and I realize that this is the moment I've been unconsciously preparing for since the day we met. All those years of careful emotional management, all those nights when I convinced myself that loving him quietly was enough, have led to this single point where I have to choose between the safety of pretending and the terrifying vulnerability of complete honesty. I stand up from the couch, not because I'm planning to leave, but because suddenly I need to move, need to do something with the energy that's been building in my chest since he asked if I ever think about us as something more than friends. Wesley tenses as I approach, like he's bracing for rejection, and the sight of him trying to protect himself from the possibility of my answer makes something fierce and protective rise up in me. You said you told me to keep it chill because you were scared, I say, stopping just close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. But you don't get to make that choice for both of us, Wes. You don't get to decide that protecting what we have is more important than finding out what we could have. Wesley's breath catches, and I can see him processing the implications of what I'm saying. The way my words shift the entire dynamic of our conversation from confession to confrontation. He looks up at me from his chair, and there's something vulnerable and hopeful in his expression that makes my chest tighten with years of accumulated longing. "You're right," he says quietly. "I know you're right. But Simon, what if we try this and it ruins everything? What if we're better as friends than we would be as anything else? What if I'm not what you need in a relationship, even if I'm what you want right now?" The questions pour out of him like he's been holding them back for months, each one revealing another layer of the fear that's kept him silent. I can hear the genuine terror in his voice, the way he's catastrophizing every possible outcome except the one where we might actually be happy together. It's so typically Wesley, to be brave enough to finally tell me the truth, but still convinced that disaster is the most likely result. "Those are all possibilities," I tell him, and my voice is steadier than I expected it to be. "But they're not certainties. And neither is the idea that we're better off never trying. Maybe we would be terrible together. Maybe we'd fight about things we never fought about as friends. Maybe we'd discover that what we feel isn't sustainable once we stop pretending it doesn't exist." Wesley nods, following my logic even as I can see him bracing for the other side of the argument. "But maybe," I continue, stepping closer until there's barely 2 feet of space between us, "we'd be incredible together. Maybe all those years of friendship would translate into something deeper and more stable than either of us has ever experienced. Maybe the reason we've never been able to make it work with other people is because we've been comparing them to what we have with each other." I can see the exact moment when Wesley stops trying to protect himself from hope, when his careful defenses crack just enough to let the possibility of us actually working out settle into his consciousness. His hands unclench in his lap, and some of the tension leaves his shoulders, like he's finally allowing himself to imagine a future where his feelings don't have to be a secret he carries alone. 3 years, I say, and there's something almost like wonder in my voice. 3 years you've been walking around knowing how you felt, watching me date other people, pretending it didn't matter. How did you stand it?" Wesley's laugh is soft and self-deprecating. "Barely," he admits. "There were nights I almost called you, almost showed up at your apartment and told you everything. But then I'd remember how good you are, how you deserve someone who's sure about what they want, and I'd convince myself that my uncertainty was reason enough to stay quiet. But you're not uncertain now," I point out, because I can see the truth of it in the way he's looking at me, in the steady resolve that's replaced the anxious energy he's been carrying all evening. "No," Wesley says, and his voice is stronger now, more confident than it's been since I walked through his door. "I'm not uncertain about how I feel about you. I haven't been uncertain about that in a long time. I'm just terrified of what happens next." "Then let me be terrified with you," I tell him, the words coming out before I can second-guess them. "Let me be scared of ruining this and wanting it anyway. Let me choose the risk instead of having it chosen for me." Wesley stares at me for a long moment, and I can practically see him weighing everything we've said against everything we haven't, all the careful boundaries we've maintained against the possibility of something real and complicated and beautiful. When he finally speaks, his voice is barely above a whisper. "What are you saying, Simon?" I take another step closer, until I'm standing directly in front of his chair, until he has to tilt his head back to meet my eyes. "I'm saying that you told me to keep it chill, but I don't want to keep it chill anymore. I'm saying that I'd rather risk our friendship for the chance at something more than spend another 3 years pretending I don't want you in ways that have nothing to do with friendship." Wesley's eyes widen, and I can see the moment when my words truly sink in, when he realizes that I'm not just acknowledging his feelings, but confessing the depth of my own. He reaches up tentatively, like he's not sure he has the right, and touches my hand where it's hanging at my side. "Are you sure?" he asks, and there's so much vulnerability in the question that it makes my heart ache. Because once we cross this line, we can't uncross it. Once we stop pretending, there's no going back to the way things were. I look down at him, at this man who has been the center of my world for a decade, who has shaped every decision I've made about love and relationships without even knowing it, and I realize that I've never been more certain of anything in my life. "I'm sure," I tell him. "The only thing I'm not sure about is why we waited so long to have this conversation." Wesley's hand is still touching mine, his fingers warm and slightly trembling, when he stands up from the chair. The movement brings us face to face, close enough that I can see the way his pupils have dilated, the way his breathing has gone shallow with the weight of everything we've just said to each other. For a moment, we just stand there, suspended in the space between confession and action, both of us seeming to realize that this is the point of no return. Tell me what you want, I say quietly, because I need to hear him say it clearly. Need to know that we're both choosing this with full awareness of what we're risking. Not what you think I want to hear, not what feels safe. Tell me what you actually want. Wesley's free hand comes up to touch my face, his thumb tracing along my cheekbone in a gesture so tender it makes my breath catch. The touch is different from all the casual contact we've shared over the years, deliberate and intimate in a way that acknowledges we've crossed into new territory, that the rules of our friendship no longer apply to whatever this is becoming. I want you, he says, and his voice carries a certainty that cuts through all the fear and uncertainty we've been swimming in. I want to stop pretending that friendship is enough when what I really want is to fall asleep next to you and wake up knowing I get to keep you. I want to stop editing myself around you, stop being careful about how long I look at you, or how often I touch you, or whether telling you how I feel about you will make things weird between us. The honesty in his words hits me like a physical force, years of careful restraint finally giving way to the truth of what he's been carrying. I can see how much it costs him to be this vulnerable, to lay out exactly what he wants without any of the protective casual language he usually hides behind. I want to know what it feels like to kiss you, Wesley continues, his voice growing stronger with each admission. I want to find out if what we have as friends translates into something even better as whatever we're about to become. I want to stop wondering what if and start finding out what is. His words settle into the space between us like a prayer, like a promise, like everything I've been afraid to hope for since the day I realized that loving Wesley Hart was as inevitable as breathing. The hand touching my face is steadier now, more certain, and I can see in his eyes that he's made his choice, that all the fear and uncertainty that's been holding him back has finally been outweighed by the possibility of us. Then stop wondering, I tell him, my voice barely above a whisper. Stop protecting us from something that might be the best thing that ever happens to either of us. Stop telling me to keep it chill when what we both want is anything but chill. Wesley's smile is soft and amazed, like he can't quite believe we're finally here, finally saying these things to each other after years of careful distance. His other hand comes up to frame my face, and suddenly we're in that space where everything slows down, where the rest of the world falls away, and there's nothing but the two of us and the choice we're about to make. Are you sure about this? He asks one more time, and I can hear that he's not asking because he doubts my answer, but because he needs to know that I'm as committed to this leap as he is, that we're jumping together. I've never been more sure of anything, I tell him, and it's the truth in a way that surprises me with its completeness. All those years of wondering and wanting and convincing myself that friendship was enough have led to this moment, and suddenly I can't imagine choosing any other path. Wesley nods, like my certainty gives him permission to fully embrace his own, and then he's leaning forward, slowly enough that I could stop him if I wanted to, deliberately enough that there's no question about what's happening between us. This isn't an accident or a moment of weakness or something we can blame on the emotional intensity of the evening. This is a choice we're making together, with full awareness of what it means. When his lips touch mine, it's nothing like I imagined and everything I hoped for at the same time. The kiss is soft and careful at first, both of us seeming to need a moment to adjust to this new reality, to the fact that we're finally allowing ourselves to have what we've wanted for so long. But then Wesley's hands tighten on my face, and I find myself stepping closer, eliminating the last inch of space between us, and the kiss deepens into something that feels like coming home and stepping off a cliff at the same time. When we finally break apart, we don't move away from each other. Instead, Wesley rests his forehead against mine, both of us breathing hard, both of us seeming to need a moment to process what just happened. The vanilla candle is still flickering on the coffee table, casting the same warm light it was 10 minutes ago, but everything else has fundamentally changed. That was, Wesley starts, then stops, like he's not sure how to finish the sentence. Worth the wait, I complete for him, and he laughs, a sound full of relief and joy and amazement that we're finally here. Yeah, he agrees, his thumb still tracing patterns on my cheek. Definitely worth the wait. But Simon, yeah, I don't want to keep it chill anymore, he says, and there's something playful in his voice now, something lighter than the heavy emotional weight we've been carrying all evening. I don't think I'm capable of keeping anything about you chill ever again. Good, I tell him, leaning into the warmth of his touch, into the reality of finally being able to have this. Because I've been tired of chill for a very long time. Wesley smiles, and it's different from any smile he's ever given me before. Unguarded and full of promise and entirely mine in a way that makes my heart race with the possibility of everything we're about to discover together. 3 weeks later, I'm lying on Wesley's couch with my head in his lap, watching him try to follow the plot of a documentary about deep-sea creatures that we both stopped paying attention to 20 minutes ago. His fingers are running through my hair in a rhythm that's become as familiar as breathing, and every so often he traces the shell of my ear or the line of my jaw, like he's still amazed that he's allowed to touch me this way. The transition hasn't been dramatic in the way I expected it might be. There were no grand declarations or immediate moving in together or sudden changes to the fundamental rhythm of who we are when we're together. Instead, what we have now feels like the most natural evolution of everything we've always been, as if the friendship we built over 10 years was just the foundation for something that was always meant to grow into this. We still order takeout from the same Thai place on Friday nights, still argue about whether the thermostat should be set to 72 or 74 degrees, still fall asleep during movies, and wake up with cricks in our necks from awkward couch positions. But now Wesley's hand finds mine during the opening credits. Now he presses kisses to the top of my head when he gets up to refill our drinks. Now we don't have to pretend that the casual intimacy we've always shared doesn't mean exactly what it's always looked like it meant. The word chill has disappeared from our vocabulary entirely, not through any conscious decision, but because it no longer serves any purpose in describing what exists between us. What we have now is deliberate and chosen and openly acknowledged, the opposite of chill in every way that matters. When Wesley's phone buzzes with a text while we're having dinner, he doesn't feel the need to hide who it's from or assure me that it's nothing important. When I mention plans for the weekend, the assumption is that we'll spend them together unless one of us specifically states otherwise. My sister noticed the change immediately during our last phone call, commenting on how different I sounded, how there was something settled and content in my voice that hadn't been there before. I found myself smiling as I told her about Wesley, about how we'd finally stopped pretending that we were just friends, about how right everything felt now that we'd stopped fighting what had been obvious to everyone except us. She wasn't surprised, of course. No one who knew us well was surprised. Emma from work just raised an eyebrow when I mentioned that Wesley and I were dating now and said it was about time we figured it out. His sister sent him a text that said simply, "Finally," followed by 3 heart emojis. Even his co-workers at the bar, people who had watched him date other people for years, seemed to greet the news with a collective sense of things finally falling into their proper place. But the real confirmation that we made the right choice comes in the quiet moments like this one, when Wesley's thumb is tracing lazy circles on my shoulder, and we're both content to exist in the comfortable silence we've perfected over a decade of friendship. There's no awkwardness now, no careful monitoring of how long we look at each other, or whether a touch lingers too long or means too much. The hypervigilance that used to characterize our interactions has been replaced by an ease that feels like coming home. My phone buzzes on the coffee table, and Wesley reaches for it automatically. A gesture so natural it doesn't register as significant until I realize that this is what trust looks like in practice. He glances at the screen and then shows it to me with a small smile. "David," he says, and there's no tension in his voice, no trace of the jealousy that used to flicker across his features whenever I mentioned dating someone else. He's asking if you want to reschedule that coffee date you never showed up for. I take the phone and delete the message without reading it fully, not out of any disrespect for David, who seemed like a genuinely good person, but because the idea of coffee with a stranger feels completely irrelevant to the life I'm building now. Wesley watches me do it with an expression of quiet satisfaction, like he's still getting used to the fact that he doesn't have to wonder anymore whether he's enough for me, whether what we have is worth protecting. "Not interested," I tell him, settling back into the warmth of his lap. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Wesley's smile is soft and amazed, the same expression he's worn for weeks now whenever one of us acknowledges how completely our situation has changed. His hand returns to my hair, fingers combing through it with the kind of absent affection that used to be reserved for casual moments that we both pretended didn't mean anything. Good, he says, and his voice carries all the certainty that was missing 3 weeks ago when he was still trying to convince both of us that keeping things chill was a viable option. Because I have no intention of sharing you with anyone, and I'm done pretending that's not exactly what I want. The possessiveness in his tone should probably bother me, but instead it makes me feel cherished, claimed in the best possible way. This is what I've been missing in every other relationship I've tried to build. Not just attraction or compatibility or shared interests, but this sense of being chosen deliberately and completely, of being someone's first choice rather than their convenient option. On the television, the documentary narrator is explaining something about bioluminescence in creatures that live so deep in the ocean that sunlight has never touched them. Wesley and I aren't paying attention, too focused on the small miracle of being able to touch each other without pretense, too amazed by how simple everything feels now that we've stopped making it complicated. Later, we'll move to his bedroom and fall asleep with my arm around his waist and his face pressed against my shoulder. And when we wake up tomorrow morning, we won't have to spend the first few minutes remembering whether we're allowed to want each other this openly. We'll just be us, the way we always should have been, without the careful distance that used to define the space between what we had and what we wanted. For now, though, we're content to stay here on the couch, learning the new geography of a relationship that feels both completely familiar and entirely transformed, both of us finally understanding that some things are worth the risk of everything.